The mother-in-law humiliates the poor bride by throwing red paint on her. Her reaction leaves everyone perplexed. Hello, welcome. Enjoy the content. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any stories. On the eve of Jessica and David's wedding, the atmosphere was full of joy and anticipation. Soft morning light filtered through the windows of the hall, where fresh flowers of different colors adorned every corner, and the sweet scent of floral arrangements filled the air. Jessica, with a radiant smile, was wrapped in a stunning wedding dress that she had always dreamed of wearing. Her best friend, Clara, was by her side, helping her with the last details and sharing laughter that echoed like music. "Look at you, Jess. You look wonderful." "David will be speechless when he sees you," commented Clara, adjusting a lock of hair on the bride's face. "Thank you, Clara. I can't wait. It's like everything is finally falling into place," replied Jessica, the excitement in her voice unmistakable. While the two friends were daydreaming about the future, the door opened abruptly, and Helen, Jessica's mother-in-law, walked in. Her presence was like a shadow cast over the joy of the day. With a critical eye, she began to assess every detail, her expression carrying a subtle disdain that did not go unnoticed. "Oh, what a simple decoration," said Helen, her words laden with sarcasm. "Did you really think this dress was suitable for a wedding? It's more like a carnival costume." Jessica felt her heart squeeze. She tried to stay calm, taking deep breaths so as not to let her anger show. "I thought the dress captured the essence of our love." Helen. "Simplicity is something we value," she replied, trying to be diplomatic. "Essence of love? Or just an excuse not to spend more money?" Helen continued, ignoring Jessica's answer. Clara, sensing the growing tension, intervened. "Helen, maybe we should focus on the good things of the day, shouldn't we? This is a special moment for all of us." Helen cast an icy glance at Clara before turning her attention back to Jessica. "I hope you're aware that my opinion matters. David deserves someone who's up to the job. And you still have a lot to prove." Helen's words were like stabs, and Jessica tried hard not to let the poison get to her. She pulled away a little, trying to find support in the flowers around her. Clara, realizing how affected her friend was, held Jessica's hand tightly. "You're amazing, Jess. Remember that. No one can take that away from you." As the preparations continued, Helen seemed unwilling to back down. She moved around the room, observing every detail, pointing out what she considered to be mistakes, insinuating that Jessica wasn't good enough for her son. The atmosphere of tension grew, and the joy that had previously permeated the room began to dissipate. "You really know how to make a bride feel special, Helen," Jessica murmured, trying to keep her tone light, but the irony in her voice was unmistakable. "Don't worry, darling, it's just reality talking. Love isn't enough to keep a marriage healthy. You need to be strong, but you also need to know how to behave," Helen replied, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Jessica swallowed, fighting back the tears that threatened to stream down her face. She wanted to be strong. She wanted to show everyone that she was capable, but Helen seemed determined to destabilize her at every turn. Clara, sensing her friend's internal struggle, began to devise a plan. "Let's show her who you really are, Jess. This is your wedding, and you deserve to shine." Jessica nodded, determined not to let Helen's words get her down. Her wedding day was approaching, and although her mother-in-law's presence was oppressive, Jessica was determined to stand her ground. She looked at Clara, and the two exchanged a complicit glance, a silent promise that together they would face any challenge that presented itself. After all, this was the day Jessica would celebrate not only her love for David, but also her own strength and resilience. During the wedding rehearsal, the atmosphere was full of nervousness. Jessica, in her dazzling white dress, tried to concentrate on the officiant's instructions, but the oppressive presence of Helen, her mother-in-law, made everything more difficult. Her mother-in-law, with her critical gaze and authoritarian posture, didn't seem willing to leave the bride alone. "Stay like that, Jessica. You need to move more gracefully." "David won't want a wife who can't walk properly," Helen said, crossing the room with a tone of disdain while adjusting a flower on her son's lapel. David, sensing the growing tension, tried to calm his fiancée down. "Hey, love, you look beautiful. Let's concentrate on what really matters," he murmured, squeezing Jessica's hand, who responded with a nervous smile. As the rehearsal progressed, Helen continued to make sarcastic comments, criticizing every little detail of the ceremony. "Did you really think those flowers would match? They're so ordinary." "David deserves better," she snapped, causing Jessica's insecurity to grow. The young woman tried to ignore the taunts, but her mother-in-law's pressure was almost palpable. "Come on, Helen, this isn't helping," David intervened, trying to protect his fiancée. "She's doing the best she can." The tension in the air was almost unbearable, and Jessica felt her heart racing. What should have been a moment of joy and anticipation was turning into a nightmare. Then, in the middle of the rehearsal, Helen, who had a disdainful expression on her face, could no longer contain her frustration. "Do you really think this is a good idea? Marrying someone who doesn't know what it's like to be a real wife? It's a bad idea, Jessica." Her voice echoed through the hall, leaving everyone in shock. Jessica was paralyzed, the trust she had begun to build crumbling. "Mom, that's not what you should be saying right now," David replied, his voice louder, demonstrating his growing irritation with his mother. Helen, however, was unwilling to back down. In an act of desperation, she grabbed a bucket of red paint that was there for decoration and in one sudden movement, threw the paint over Jessica. The scarlet liquid stained the white dress, symbolizing Helen's disapproval in a way that no one could ignore. The silence that followed was deafening. The guests, who were watching in shock, exchanged perplexed glances. Jessica, stunned, looked at David, whose mouth was hanging open in disbelief. "Helen, what have you done?" he shouted, his tone now high and full of anger. Jessica felt humiliated. She found herself the center of attention, not in the way she had imagined. "How can you do this to me?" she muttered, her voice almost inaudible as tears began to form in her eyes. The scene was one of despair that seemed almost unbearable. "You're not good enough for him," Helen shouted, as if in a pitched battle, oblivious to the pain she was causing. "I only want what's best for my son." Jessica's expression changed from shock to a mixture of determination and despair. In the midst of all the confusion, she realized that the battle was not just hers, but that of all the women who had faced oppression and disdain. The voices around her began to blend into murmurs, each one processing the surreal scene that had just taken place. "Jessica, breathe," David said, trying to get closer, but the young woman felt lost amid the chaos and humiliation. The rehearsal, which was supposed to be a moment of joy and togetherness, had turned into an emotional battleground, and Helen was at the center of this hurricane, challenging not only the bride, but the very idea of love and respect. Seeing herself bathed in red paint, Jessica felt a mixture of humiliation and anger. But instead of letting herself down, she took a deep breath and decided that this would be her moment. With the strength that welled up inside her, she looked at the guests who were watching her with expressions of surprise and discomfort. It was time to take a stand. "Everyone, I know this may seem like a joke right now, but this ink symbolizes something much bigger than a simple stain on my dress," Jessica began, her voice firm and clear. The murmurs stopped, and all eyes were on her. All this time, I've been fighting against other people's expectations of who I should be. And frankly, that struggle has left me exhausted. She paused, observing the reactions around her. Some guests looked at each other, while others seemed to be absorbing her words. For a long time, the pressure to be perfect, to meet all the standards imposed, led me to doubt myself. These expectations come not only from society, but from within the family itself. The pressure to be the ideal daughter-in-law, the perfect wife. All of this made me feel that I would never be enough. Jessica looked directly at Helen, who was paralyzed, her expression of contempt now replaced by a disconcerting curiosity. I'm not weak, and I don't need anyone's approval to be who I am. And above all, I'm not going to let the toxicity of the relationship between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law define my future, she continued, her voice gaining strength. The truth is that David's family has a history of control and manipulation, and I refuse to be just another victim in that narrative. The room was silent, the impact of his words echoing in the minds of everyone present. I know that many of you here can relate to this. How many of us have felt pressured to conform to what others expect? Jessica paused, encouraging the women to reflect on their own experiences. I no longer want to live in fear of what others think. I want to celebrate the love I have for David. But I also want to celebrate who I am. And that means I need to break free from the chains that have been placed on me. Jessica's words began to touch the hearts of many guests who started to move, some with a slight nod, others with expressions of identification. And if today is the day I set myself free, then so be it. This ink, which many may see as a mistake, is actually a symbol of my new freedom. She looked around, realizing that her sincerity was resonating. If you too have ever felt trapped, I invite you to join me. Let's break free together. Helen, still in shock, began to realize that her attempt at control had failed. She hadn't expected Jessica to stand up and become the protagonist of her own story. Jessica, you don't have to do this, Helen tried to argue, but the bride's determination was palpable. No, Helen, I need to do this, Jessica replied firmly. Today isn't about you or what you think is best for me. It's about what I want and need to be happy. The room was a mixture of tension and hope. Some of the guests, who had previously been divided, began to unite around Jessica's courage. The truth she shared was illuminating the shadows that many of the women present were carrying. Jessica realized that by transforming her pain and humiliation into strength, she was not only liberating herself, but also inspiring others to do the same. I want each and every one of you to know that you are not alone. We all have our own battles, and it's time we started supporting each other instead of letting ourselves be controlled by old traditions and expectations. Empathy began to emerge among the guests, and Jessica was determined to carry this message forward, not just that night, but in all the days to come. Clara watched the scene with her heart racing. Jessica's courage in standing up in front of everyone and talking about her experience was inspiring. Helen, who until then had been the center of attention with her criticism and sarcasm, now seemed like a shadow, an oppressive figure who could no longer control the situation. The atmosphere had changed completely, and the transformation in the guests' expressions was palpable. Clara knew that this moment was crucial, not just for Jessica, but for all the women present who in some way also felt suffocated by toxic family relationships. "You're not alone, Jess," Clara said, getting up and walking towards her friend. "I went through something similar myself. My mother always wanted to control every aspect of my life, from who I dated to the profession I chose. It was like I had no voice." All eyes turned to Clara, who, in an act of solidarity, began to share her own story. One day, I decided that I had to be myself, no matter what she thought. It was a painful process, but I finally managed to cut some ties. The women in the audience began to murmur, and some stood up, excited to share their own experiences. One of them, called Mariana, took courage and said, "I also faced the same situation. My father always told me that I wasn't good enough and that I should follow the career he chose for me. It took me years to understand that I deserved to choose my own path." Mariana's words echoed in the room, and soon several women began to speak out. Monica, one of the bridesmaids, raised her hand and, with tears in her eyes, shared how she had struggled to assert herself in a wedding where her voice was often silenced. "I'm not a weak person. I am strong, and I am capable of deciding on my own life," Monica said, prompting other women to join her in a chorus of strong voices. The atmosphere of support grew with each report, as if a wave of empowerment was spreading through the room. Helen, who until then had been implacable, was now visibly disconcerted, watching her dream family union crumble before her eyes. Jessica, seeing the growing support of her friends and guests, felt a new wave of strength inside her. "Look at us," said Jessica, with a smile that mixed relief and determination. "We are all here, united, to show that we are more than the expectations that others place on us. We're not just daughters, wives, or mothers. We are women, and we have the right to live our lives the way we choose." The audience applauded, and an emotional Clara raised her arms, encouraging all women to join this new chain of strength. Let's stop allowing the voices of oppression to silence us. Each of us has a story, and each of us deserves to be heard. The mood in the hall had changed radically, and the murmurs of support turned into thunderous applause. Helen, realizing that she could no longer control the narrative, began to feel isolated, as if she were trapped in a bubble of her own creation. The voices of support for Jessica became a symphony that resonated not only in the physical space, but also in the hearts of every woman present. "You don't have to face it alone, Jessica," said Clara, taking her friend's hand. "We're all here for you. Let's turn this into a moment of empowerment." And so, as the room echoed with applause and words of support, Jessica felt that she was not only fighting for herself, but for all women who have ever felt dominated, devalued, and silenced. The presence of Clara and the other women was a powerful reminder that, together, they were stronger than any individual oppression. The wedding, which could have been an event marked by conflict and disappointment, was turning into a celebration of resilience and solidarity. David watched the scene with a heavy heart. Red paint ran down Jessica's wedding dress, a symbol of the disapproval and pain that her mother, Helen, had dumped on her. He stood up, emotion brimming in his eyes. "Jessica," he began, his voice breaking, "I love you. You're the woman of my life, and you always will be. No matter what my mother says or does, I'll be by your side. Your happiness is my priority." Jessica looked at David, a mixture of gratitude and desperation in her gaze. She needed his support now more than ever. "I just want to be accepted, David. I feel like I'm constantly compared to a standard I can never reach," she said, her voice trembling. He approached her, holding her hands tightly. "You don't have to change for anyone, especially her. Helen needs to understand that you're perfect just the way you are. He'll do it for you." David turned around, facing his mother with determination. "Mom, enough. You need to stop controlling everything. Jessica is an incredible woman, and I'm not going to let you treat her like this. This marriage is about the two of us, and you need to respect our happiness." Helen, her eyes wide, tried to argue. "But David, you don't understand. I just want to protect you. She's not good enough. She's not of our class, of our family. Her voice, once so firm, now sounded fragile, as if the truth she had always defended was crumbling around her. "Stop talking like that," David shouted, anger finally erupting. "You don't know anything about what's good for me. You don't know how I feel around her. Jessica is strong, intelligent, and makes me happy. That's what matters. If you can't see that, then I don't know how I can continue to have a relationship with you." The room was silent, all the guests stunned by the confrontation. Helen, stunned, seemed to lose the confidence that had always accompanied her. She looked at Jessica, who was now standing up, the red paint on her dress reflecting both her pain and her strength. "You can't control me, Helen," Jessica declared, her voice firm. "I'm more than your expectations, no more living in the shadow of what you want or expect. I'm a woman and I have the right to be happy." Helen tried to defend herself, but her words sounded empty. "You don't understand. I just wanted the best for my son." The pleading in her voice was almost pathetic, and the look of despair on her face began to fade as she realized she was losing control of the situation. "And I'm the best thing for him, Helen," Jessica interjected. "He chose to love me. You need to accept that. I'm not a threat to you, but a blessing in your son's life. If you really love him, you should be happy for him." David looked at his mother, his heart torn between the love he felt for Jessica and the pain of seeing his mother in pain. "Mom, please listen to what Jessica is saying. You need to change, and it starts now. If you can't support us, then we need to reevaluate what this relationship means to us." The atmosphere in the room was tense, but there was a new energy in the air. Jessica felt that she had freed herself from a weight that had been oppressing her for a long time. David, by her side, was the anchor she needed, and together they were rising against the storm that Helen represented. At that moment, the truth emerged like a ray of sunshine after a fierce storm. Helen, faced with her daughter-in-law's strength and her son's determination, began to realize that her manipulation had lost strength. However, the resistance was still palpable in her gaze. "I just wanted to protect you, David." "I didn't know you felt that way," Helen murmured, her voice now lower, almost broken. "And I just want you to respect me, Mom." "That's what I expect from you," David replied firmly, but also with compassion. "Let's start respecting each other as a family, or we want to be able to move forward." Jessica felt a surge of hope. The battle was not yet won, but change was beginning to form, and the love she shared with David was growing stronger. The red paint on her dress now symbolized not only the struggle, but also the transformation that was beginning to take place. The celebration of Jessica and David's wedding, which had begun in a light of joy, was now taking a new turn. The tension in the air caused by Helen, the controlling mother-in-law, had dissipated, but the consequences of the previous outburst left deep scars. The guests, who had initially been horrified by the red paint scene, were now in a state of reflection, ready to support Jessica on her journey of empowerment. Jessica, with the paint still visible on her dress, looked around and felt the strength emanating from her friends and family. Clara, always by her side, took her by the hand and said, "You're stronger than you think, Jess. This is your moment." Those words resonated deeply with Jessica, who began to realize that ink was not a symbol of weakness, but of resistance. The atmosphere in the hall began to change, conversations intensified, and music took over. With a smile on his face, David approached Jessica, his eyes shining with love and admiration. "You were amazing up there," he said, wrapping her in a tight hug. "Never doubt your worth, Jessica. You showed me today that you're ready to face any storm." The emotion between the two of them was palpable, and Jessica knew that the dynamic of their relationship had changed forever. "I couldn't have done this without you, David. Your presence gives me strength," she replied. feeling confidence growing inside her. The guests began to gather around the couple, forming a circle of support. Amid laughter and tears, a toast was proposed by one of David's friends. To true love, which grows stronger in adversity and teaches us to be stronger together. The glasses clinked, and emotion filled the room. Helen, watching the scene, felt a mixture of pride and despair. She had never seen David so happy and so in love with someone. But at the same time, the thought of losing control over her son tormented her. Jessica and David, please remember that life is not only about love, but also about responsibility and commitment, she intervened, trying to reassert her role as matriarch. Jessica, now more confident, didn't let herself be intimidated. Helen, I respect your concern, but what we need is space to grow as a couple. True love is based on trust, not control, she replied, her firm voice echoing through the room. The guests, who had previously been mere spectators, began to speak up. That's right, Jessica. You deserve to be happy, shouted a woman from the audience, raising her glass in support. The murmur of agreement grew, and the atmosphere turned into a veritable shout of empowerment. Clara, sensing the change, decided to stand up too. Life teaches us to fight for what we believe in. We all have stories to tell and battles to face, she declared, her voice resonating with determination. Jessica and David looked at each other, realizing that they were surrounded by an army of support. I never imagined that our marriage would become a symbol of struggle and overcoming, David murmured, amazed at Jessica's strength and the unity that was forming around them. This is just the beginning, my love. Together, we can face any challenge, she replied, feeling a warmth in her heart. What could have been a day marked by tragedy and conflict turned into a celebration of love and feminine strength. The women began to come together in small groups, sharing their own experiences of overcoming, creating a circle of empowerment that resonated throughout the hall. Jessica, now immersed in that supportive environment, felt that every word exchanged was a step towards freedom and independence. As the music played softly in the background, Jessica and David shared an intimate moment, away from the hustle and bustle. What do you think this means for us now? He asked, looking into her eyes. It means that we're a team, not just in moments of joy, but also in difficulties. I'm ready to face any storm by your side, said Jessica, the determination in her voice echoing through the room. The new family dynamic was beginning to take hold, and although Helen was still present, Jessica's strength had become a new benchmark. The celebration was far from perfect, but it was now authentic, reflecting the struggles and achievements of everyone there. Jessica, with the red paint as a symbol of her strength, felt more powerful than ever, ready to face any challenge life threw at her. The women gathered in a bright corner of the hall, while the wedding party continued in the background. The atmosphere, once tense, now pulsed with a new energy, a desire for transformation and empowerment. Clara, always the most sensitive and attentive, took the lead, pulling the other women into a circle. Her gaze was firm and encouraging. Let's sit here and share our stories. Each of us has something valuable to say, something that can help the others, she suggested, her voice soft but determined. Jessica observed the women around her, feeling the strength that emanated from that group. Each of them brought with them struggles, challenges, and victories, and there, in that moment, they were willing to open up and support each other. Clara, with a warm smile, began. I want each of you to write a letter to yourself, acknowledging everything you've achieved and the strength you have. It can be difficult, but it's a powerful exercise. The women looked at each other. Some seemed nervous, but soon the atmosphere turned into a safe space. Jessica, sitting down with the others, picked up a piece of paper and began to scribble. The words flowed like a river, each sentence becoming an affirmation of her strength. "I am strong," she wrote. "I deserve to be loved and respected." As she wrote, she felt the weight of her insecurity begin to dissipate, giving way to a sense of liberation. When they had all finished, Clara asked each of them to read their letter aloud. The silence that followed was interrupted by the sound of a trembling voice. It was an older woman, her eyes full of tears. She began to read her letter, and her vulnerability touched everyone. "I've always felt invisible, as if my voice didn't matter. But today, I affirm that I do matter. My experiences have shaped who I am, and I will no longer let that define me negatively." Jessica felt her heart race. It was a moment of collective catharsis. When it was her turn, she took a deep breath, holding the letter with trembling hands. Jessica, and I've always felt small in the face of other people's expectations," she began. "For a long time, my mother-in-law's voice echoed in my mind, making me doubt my ability to be happy. But today, I've decided that more than that. I am strong, I am capable, and I won't let anyone make me feel less than what I am." The atmosphere was filled with emotion, and as Jessica spoke, the energy around her seemed to vibrate. Clara, next to her, looked at her with pride, while other women began to applaud, encouraging Jessica's courage. "That's it. You're amazing," one of them shouted, raising her arms in support. Jessica felt tears streaming down her face, but it was no longer out of sadness or insecurity. It was a recognition of her strength and the support network that had formed around her. Every story shared, every vulnerability exposed, created a sense of sisterhood that she had never experienced before. "Let's all go together." "This is our time to shine," exclaimed Clara, infecting everyone with her energy. The women began to hug each other, to encourage each other, forming an unbreakable bond. Jessica smiled, feeling part of something bigger, something that transcended the difficulties she had faced. As the party continued in the background, they became a haven of strength and solidarity. The room resounded with laughter, stories, and promises of mutual support. Jessica realized that, more than ever, she was ready to face any challenge that came her way, not just for herself, but as part of a community of women standing up for each other. Empowerment was there, pulsating in the air, and at that moment, she knew she had found her voice and the support she had always craved. Helen was furious, her features contorted in a mixture of anger and contempt. The humiliation she had felt during the wedding rehearsal still consumed her, and now, in front of the watching crowd, she felt threatened. Jessica, for her part, had found a new strength within herself. The red paint that had once shamed her was now a symbol of her resistance and empowerment. She took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline pulsing, and decided that she would not allow Helen to intimidate her any longer. Firmly, Jessica turned towards her mother-in-law, who was about to fire off more criticism. "Helen," she began, her voice echoing around the room, "Enough. Enough of you wanting to control everything and everyone around you. I'm the woman your son chose, and I deserve respect." The guests remained silent, each absorbing the courage that Jessica was showing. Helen, taken aback, tried to respond, but the bride's determination left her speechless. The young woman continued, "I'm not a child, and I'm not going to let myself be underestimated anymore. The way you've treated me so far just shows how much you have insecurities that you need to deal with." David, who was standing a few steps away, felt a surge of pride invade his chest. He had always known that Jessica was strong, but seeing that strength manifested in front of Helen was something he would never forget. He decided to intervene. "Mom, this isn't about you anymore," he said, keeping his gaze steady. "Jessica and I are building our life together, and you need to learn to respect that. Your actions only bring pain and division. And I don't want that for our family. Helen, taken aback by her son's defense, tried to regain her composure. I only want what's best for you, David. I've always done that, she said, her voice shaking. You don't understand what I've been through to get here, and you think I don't have the right to choose what's best for me? Jessica intervened, her voice getting stronger and stronger. You may have your expectations, but I'm not your project. I'm a woman with dreams, desires, and a life that I want to build alongside your son. If you love me, you need to accept me as I am, not as you would like me to be. Helen was paralyzed, Jessica's words resonating in her mind. The young woman seemed to have transformed in front of her, and that scared her more than anything. You don't know what you're talking about, she retorted, trying to keep her voice steady, but insecurity was beginning to creep in. I just want to protect my son. And you think attacking me and belittling me is a form of protection? Jessica replied, crossing her arms. I'm not a threat to David, but you're becoming one to our relationship. If you carry on like this, you'll lose not only me, but your own son. The silence in the room was heavy. The guests exchanged glances, many of them admiring Jessica's correctitude, while others watched Helen's expression, which now seemed to waver. She looked at David for support, but saw only determination in his gaze. David, you can't take her side, Helen begged, her voice now almost pleading. She's a stranger. She doesn't know anything about our family. She's the woman I love, and I chose to stand by her. You need to understand that your way of acting will only drive you away from me, David replied, his tone unwavering. He was determined not to let his mother's toxicity affect the relationship he had built with Jessica. Jessica, realizing that Helen was losing control, stepped forward. I'm not here to compete with you or to take your place in David's life. I'm here to be a partner. And if you continue to act like this, there will be no room for both of us. I won't accept this kind of treatment anymore. Helen, feeling completely exposed, tried to justify herself once again. I just wanted you to be perfect for him. For you to be what I dreamed of for my son, she said, her voice breaking. But I'm not you, Helen, and nor should I be. I'm Jessica, and I have the right to be who I am, with my imperfections and my own life. The love we have for each other is what matters, not your expectations, she replied, looking straight into her mother-in-law's eyes. The confrontation was far from the conclusion Helen had hoped for, and for the first time, she realized that the battle was not just against Jessica, but against the change that was taking place in the relationship between mother and son. Jessica had stood up, and Helen felt she was about to lose everything she had always tried to protect. The tension in the air was palpable, and the room was silent, awaiting the outcome of that battle of wills. The atmosphere at the ceremony was charged with renewed energy. After the turmoil and Jessica's revelation about the oppression she had faced, the wedding had become something much bigger than just the union of two lovers. The flowers that adorned the room, once mere decorations, now symbolized the strength and resilience of the women present. Clara watched with a smile as the guests began to applaud, not just Jessica and David, but everyone who had stood up against the intimidation. I really didn't believe she could do it, said Clara to a close friend, her eyes shining with pride. She's turned the tide, and now everyone sees who she really is. Jessica, still dressed in the red paint that Helen had thrown, looked at David with a mixture of relief and emotion. He held her hand tightly, as if reaffirming his commitment not only as a husband, but as a partner in all the battles that might come. I love you, Jessica. You're stronger than I could ever have imagined, he said, his voice laced with emotion. Jessica smiled, feeling that she no longer needed to hide behind insecurity. The exchange of vows was approaching, and Jessica prepared herself for a moment she knew would be significant. "David," she began, her voice firm, "I promise to be your partner in all things, always respecting your individuality and your freedom, just as I expect you to respect mine." The silence in the room was palpable, and every word that left her lips seemed to echo in the minds of everyone present. "Together, we will build a life where we can both flourish." David, touched, replied sincerely, "Jessica, I promise that I will never let anyone's shadow, not even my mother's, interfere with our happiness. You are the light of my life, and together we will be unshakable." Helen's gaze, which had once been one of contempt, now reflected confusion and belated recognition. Jessica and David's words were not just promises of love, they were a manifesto of freedom, a request for everyone there to respect each other's autonomy. The tension that had once dominated the atmosphere now dissipated, replaced by a warmth of acceptance and support. As the music began to play, Jessica and David made their way to the center of the dance floor. What could have been a moment of shame, with the red paint staining her dress, turned into a symbol of empowerment. She spun around in the dance, the vibrant colors reflecting her new reality. "Look, strong," she exclaimed, laughing as she moved. The guests began to join in the dance, and Clara was one of the first to stand up. "Let's celebrate this incredible woman," she shouted, pulling other friends along. The hall was filled with laughter, applause, and united voices, echoing the feeling that oppression would no longer have a place in their lives. The atmosphere was charged with love, and Jessica couldn't help but feel that she had conquered not only her space, but also the freedom to be who she really was. As she danced, she looked around and saw other women, her friends and family, united in a movement of empowerment. Each one of them, with their own stories and battles, was there to celebrate not only Jessica and David's love, but the freedom and strength that each of them possessed. "I can't believe all this happened," said Clara, pulling Jessica into a tight hug during the dance. "You were amazing. You're proof that we don't have to be defined by what others think of us." Jessica smiled, feeling light and empowered. The red paint, which had once embarrassed her, was now a symbol of her struggle and her victory. She realized that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, surrounded by love and support, ready to face any challenge that life might bring. There, in that moment of celebration, there was no room for fear or insecurity. Marriage wasn't just a union, it was a manifesto of strength and freedom, and Jessica was determined to live each day of this new life with courage and authenticity. After the ceremony, while the guests were still celebrating, Helen, her face marked by confusion and a touch of vulnerability, approached Jessica. The atmosphere was charged with emotion, but the bride, with the red paint still visible on her dress, radiated a strength that had previously seemed absent. Helen, taking a deep breath, decided to open her heart. "Jessica," began Helen, her voice trembling, I need to tell you something." Jessica, somewhat hesitant but willing to listen, nodded, encouraging her mother-in-law to continue. "I've always thought that if I could control everything around me, I wouldn't lose what I love most. And for me, that's always been David. But didn't you realize that your way of controlling him ended up pushing him away from you?" Jessica replied, keeping her gaze steady. "What you did today was unacceptable." I know," Helen sighed, frustration mixing with regret. "When I saw you, so confident, so strong, I remembered myself years ago. I too was the bride who dreamed of a wonderful future, but ended up trapped in a marriage that wasn't what I expected. I had a mother-in-law like me, always criticizing, always demanding more." Jessica narrowed her eyes, trying to understand. What do you mean? Helen hesitated but decided to open up. My marriage was a prison. I was young and full of dreams, but the pressure to be the perfect wife ended up consuming me. I didn't want you to go through the same thing. I saw in you the fragility I had, and I thought that if I put you under pressure, you wouldn't be able to make David happy. I just wanted to protect him. Jessica remained silent, processing her mother-in-law's words. Didn't you realize that by trying to protect David, you were only pushing him away from me? And, moreover, from yourself. I didn't know how to act. I thought I was being a good mother, Helen replied, her voice breaking. But I see now that I was wrong. I didn't know you had this strength inside you. I let myself be dominated by fear and insecurity. Jessica felt a wave of empathy for Helen. Both were trapped in a cycle of oppression, but the difference was that one of them had found the courage to break free. We can change that, Helen. You don't have to be the person you were. We can try to build something new, a healthier relationship. Helen looked at Jessica, her eyes shining with tears. Do you really think that's possible? I don't know if I deserve this chance. Of course you deserve it, Jessica replied firmly. We all deserve it. Let's work together, not just for us, but also for David. He needs both of us. And more importantly, we need each other. At that moment, Helen felt that a barrier that had been erected between them was beginning to crumble. You're an incredible woman, Jessica. I never recognized that before. I want to be better, but I don't know where to start. Jessica held out her hand, a simple but powerful gesture. Let's start with a hug, and from there, we can talk, support, and heal together. Helen hesitated for a moment, but then accepted Jessica's offer. The two hugged, a gesture of reconciliation that symbolized a new beginning. The warmth of the embrace brought a sense of relief and renewal. Outside, the music was still playing, and the guests were still celebrating, but at that moment, it was clear that the real party had only just begun. The two women, once rivals, were now united in their vulnerability and strength, ready to face the future side by side. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.